Hi everybody, and welcome to another WeatherCast USA Quickcast. On this Quickcast, we're going to break down the extended active severe threat across the northern tier of the country from about Tuesday on through Saturday and Sunday. And we'll take a look at the models and detail what this active severe weather pattern means for you, especially across that northern tier of the country, as well as get a general look and see what that pattern shapes up to be for the next couple days. So let's get into it. First, here's the active surface pattern here across the continental US for Monday going into Tuesday. It's been pretty similar the last couple days, but we've had some troughing out here into the Intermountain West and into the northern Rockies. That's kicked off rounds of scattered thunderstorms with isolated severe storms across Idaho, Montana, parts of Wyoming. And then we've also had lee-side troughing here across the front range of the Rockies. That's helped kick off rounds of severe storms in the high plains and also off the front range. Another day today, just like the last few, where we have isolated but strong to severe thunderstorms across eastern Colorado, western Kansas, parts of western Nebraska, and also southwest parts of South Dakota. And then also, it seems like we've been talking about this area for quite a while. The southeast continues to stay stormy and wet, with a decaying trough across the southeast. That's sparked a number of showers and thunderstorms, numerous showers and thunderstorms, with a lot of torrential tropical rainfall. So flooding is a bit of a threat down there. There are flash flood watches continuing another day today, where we've had continued flash flood watches, and portions of this area here in the southeast could get a few more inches of rain over the next 24 to 48 hours. So localized flash flooding definitely an issue down here in the southeast and even into the Carolinas and the southern Appalachians. This is the same boundary that has kicked off the tropical development Dexter. You can see it here on the very edge of our screen. Dexter is leaving the map here as we speak. It is no threat to the East Coast other than some higher surf, maybe a little bit of an elevated rip current risk. We do have to watch this boundary going into the later part of the week. There is a potential there that the National Hurricane Center is watching for. It could spin up another homegrown development, and likely a weaker system. A tropical depression is not out of the question. Even a tropical storm, if it really got its act together very quickly. The one thing that it runs into here in this part of the Atlantic is it's going to run out of room. The models are kind of in disagreement whether it moves to the west or more towards the north, but in either direction, it's going to run out of room pretty quickly and then come ashore. That should reduce some of that chances of any stronger system developing out of that area to watch in the Atlantic. Otherwise, we've generally had a pretty nice day, again, other than the smoke across the Midwest, the Great Lakes, and into the Northeast. The temperatures have remained almost fall-like. It's been a nice week to get the pumpkin spice out of the pantry. And yeah, other than the smoke, it's been pretty nice. Had a couple showers and thunderstorms here in the mid-Mississippi Valley today, but those should wind down here in the next couple hours. And yeah, we should get another nice day tomorrow in much of the Northeast and Midwest before we start to look at some heat starting to build back here into the Southwest. That'll expand out into the Central Plains. So by the end of the week, it's going to get hot again in the southern Mississippi Valley and into especially the southern plains. So again, looking at the Monday afternoon outlook, this is our outlook here for Monday by the Storm Prediction Center. It's at a pretty expansive area of slight risk. Within that, large hail and damaging winds are the primary threat. There is a bit of a tornado threat listed by the Storm Prediction Center here into the areas in the high plains. But so far, we haven't seen many tornado warnings out of this, if at all, I think, today. So we'll see about that. Mostly, again, a damaging wind and hail threat. That little shortwave is going to continue working out of the Intermountain West and into the high plains on Tuesday. We have another slight risk area covering the Dakotas and parts of eastern Montana. Within that, we do have an area of slight risk. That'll include basically North and South Dakota. Wouldn't be surprised if it gets adjusted a little bit in the next 12 to 24 hours. But overall, another slight risk day by the Storm Prediction Center. And very similar today, it's a low-end tornado threat up here in the Dakotas, and then also a wind and hail threat. You can see really the wind and hail threat almost the exact same, covering that slight risk area. But essentially it is an all-hazard slight risk for some wind, hail, and an isolated tornado or two. So we will have to watch that. That could increase chances in the next 12 to 24 hours, depending on how this trough ejects out of the Rockies and the exact trajectory. That trough is going to continue working to the north and east to eventually lift up into the Canadian prairies and into northern parts of Ontario. On Wednesday, the Storm Prediction Center currently has a marginal risk. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if parts of this gets upgraded as we get closer to that day one forecast. but essentially for parts of Minnesota all the way down into extreme northern parts of Kansas, much of eastern and central Nebraska, eastern parts of the Dakotas, and even into northern parts of Iowa. This would be for Wednesday. It should be a very similar forecast to the today as well as tomorrow, where it could be a slight all hazards risk, likely a low-end tornado risk, and then wind and hail are going to be those primary severe hazards on Wednesday. Once we get through Wednesday, this trough continues to eject out and away from the continental US. It'll lift off into Canada. It may create some stronger storms into northern Ontario on Thursday, but otherwise we'll look for a reset. Currently, the Storm Prediction Center has no day 4 risk, but they do have a day 5 risk, and this covers parts of North and South Dakota as well as Minnesota. This is a little bit rare for this time of year. We don't see a lot of day 4 plus risks in the Storm Prediction Center's summer forecasting. So the confidence is growing that there is going to be a severe weather risk that extends from Tuesday, Wednesday, possibly Thursday, but especially into Friday, Saturday, and Sunday across the northern plains and the upper Midwest. And again, this is a day 5 risk. There is discussion within this day 5 risk about Saturday and Sunday as well. So interestingly enough, they haven't added specific risk for the 6 or 7 in the outlooks, but they did discuss it somewhat broadly in that day 5 risk, which is a little bit interesting how they did that today. But yeah, just be aware, the Storm Prediction Center already eyeing this area here, an area that's been hit pretty hard over the summer with rounds of severe weather, and it looks like that's not going to be going away anytime soon here, at least the next 5 days or so. So let's dive in a little deeper into those models and see what they are saying in regards to the severe weather risks across the northern tier of the country from Tuesday all the way into the weekend. So first I want to take a look at the short-range convective-allowing models. First, we'll look at the HRRR model and see how it looks like. The remnant boundaries are going to help kick off more storms here. Potentially some severe storms in the Canadian prairies tomorrow afternoon as well, and we don't talk about them enough. But yeah, just if you do have travels here across the border, do be aware, or friends and family, do let them know there may be some severe storms there tomorrow. Wouldn't be surprised if it's an all hazards threat, with especially hail and damaging winds being the primary threat there. And then Tuesday afternoon, we look for storms to fire here across the central part of South Dakota, and then that'll continue working to the east, maybe a complex of storms working across the Red River Valley between Minnesota and South Dakota, and potentially a couple supercells on that southern flank of the convection. So we'll look for those. This model, I don't know if it does a great job at it, honestly. It kind of, I think, underdoes some of the convection tomorrow, according to some of the other convective-allowing models. The latest run here of the HRRR does show a little bit more of a potential for a convective system to develop as it crosses into parts of Iowa and Nebraska tomorrow evening, and eventually kind of fizzle out as we get into the morning on Wednesday. But I do want to take a look at the NAM, and we'll see very similar to today. It maybe actually overdoes the convection today a little bit, but showing more of those isolated cells across the Front Range into the high plains, and some of that activity up here into the northern Rockies. I think it does a better job though tomorrow. We can see that initiation initially as supercells developing here in central parts of North Dakota. The NAM looks like it shifts it a little bit further to the north, so we'll see exactly where that kind of sets up between South Dakota and North Dakota. But either way, if you're in the central part of the Dakotas, do prepare for some severe weather tomorrow. And yes, the NAM takes it initially as supercells and then upscales those as they continue working the east into more of a organized convective system that may work its way into parts of Nebraska and then down the Missouri River Valley into the western parts of Iowa before, like the HRRR, it starts to fizzle in those early morning hours of Wednesday. But I do think some of the convective initiation and then also how it clusters into a bit of an MCS that kind of takes that southeastward dive. I do like how the NAM is kind of detailing that particular area on Tuesday. Again, we have a little bit of time. We'll certainly get more model refinement, and even day 1 models will have a lot to say as they kind of handle any outflows and residual boundaries from convective activity overnight. And that is going to be, I think, the general theme here this week. A lot of the daily severe weather details we're going to get after models kind of deal with the convective activity from the night prior. So that will lead to potentially some big changes between the day 2 outlooks and the day 1 outlooks on the same day of each round of severe weather. So let's take a little broader look. This is going to look at some of our jet stream level winds, and that'll really detail a little bit more what's going on. We can see there is a ridge starting to build here in the southwest. We will see that here in this model run expand. This ridge is going to expand out into parts of the southern plains. It is going to get hotter there this week. And then that will force the shortwave troughs to really be confined to this northern tier. And we see that here today on Monday with that little piece of activity going off into parts of Idaho and Montana, and then some trailing lee side troughing really kind of being the spark for those storms across the high plains. As we go into Tuesday, we can see that lifts off as that high does start to expand a little bit here. And that lifts off into parts of the southern Canadian prairies. Still enough to spark some of those severe storms in the Dakotas tomorrow evening and overnight. And then Thursday may be a little bit of a reset period. I wouldn't be surprised if we get some more activity here back into the northern Rockies, maybe the far northern high plains, with the next trough starting to dig into the Pacific Northwest. And we may also get some storms, likely not as severe, but across the Canadian-US border up into northern Ontario with that original piece of energy. So as that lifts off, that original piece of energy may get a few showers and storms across that northern tier. But basically Thursday we'll start to get a reset. We'll look back here towards that new trough ejection. And this one does appear to be deeper than the last few. And we can really see that developing here into the week as that ejects off into basically along the Canadian-US border. A lot of the modeling the last day or so does show that it becomes negatively tilted. That enhances the inflow and really helps convective initiation. That negative tilt to the trough does aid in severe weather development. Particularly, this is Friday going into Saturday. We can see that kind of lead jet streak across the Dakotas. And then by Saturday, it's up here into the northern parts of Minnesota. And then from there, it starts to flatten out a little bit. We may still get some severe weather a little bit further east and south across the Great Lakes and into the Midwest on Sunday. Sunday, it looks a little bit more of a zonal flow with the jet stream level winds as well as the low level jet. So Sunday may be more of a linear mode day where we still have to watch for damaging winds, potentially some larger hail, but the more significant sheared environment is going to, I think, be back between Friday afternoon and evening in the Dakotas, maybe down into parts of Nebraska, and even pushing into the Red River Valley a little bit, especially late on Friday. And then Saturday, I think is going to be another pretty big day. That moves east a little bit, the eastern parts of the Dakotas, much of Minnesota, and then potentially extending down into parts of Iowa, Nebraska, and Kansas on Saturday. There's going to be a little bit more capping down here further south, so we'll see how that works into the system. But I think back here, certainly closer to this negatively tilted trough, we should get enough to break the cap that would be in place here and allow for some pretty big storms to upscale in the upper Midwest. So looking here at the 850 millibar height, this is going to show more of that low-level jet and those surface level winds. And you can see here by Wednesday, we still have a pretty strong low-level jet across the plains, pushing a lot of moisture also up into this area, into the northern plains and into the upper Midwest. And that'll also help create eventually more of those storms into Friday and Saturday and potentially Sunday too. And we do see across this area on Friday, we see that low-level jet coming in here from the southern plains into parts of Minnesota, Nebraska, Iowa, and then also here in the Dakotas. So that should support some shear here, some vertical shear and different wind profiles across the atmosphere. That should lead to some pretty good upscaling and convective growth, and then also the ventilation of those updrafts. So we should get some pretty strong storms, potentially some supercells, and then like we saw with some of those convective-allowing models, likely supercellular initiation with an all hazards threat as those storms are early on in their life cycle, and then eventually upscaling into more convective systems, potentially even some pretty organized convective systems that could extend a higher end severe threat well into the evening. And certainly this part of the country is not unfamiliar with that here this summer, with a lot of heavy wind events across this corridor over the month of July. As we put this into motion a little bit more, continuing into parts of Minnesota and Iowa, and even pieces of Wisconsin here by later on Saturday. So a pretty good low-level jet in place, especially here across the northern Midwest and northern plains this week. That'll aid in that development here and also aid in those wind profiles. As you can see, the upper level winds are more of that west-southwest direction. So we do have some changing wind directions with height. This is another way to visualize this with the height anomalies. We can start to see some of those features, especially some of those larger scale features. We can really see this ridge pattern really developing here across the south, southwest, and then pushing east actually into parts of the southern plains. It's going to get hot, as I mentioned a little bit ago, in parts of those areas: Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, Arkansas, down into the southern Mississippi River Valley. It's going to start getting to feel like summer again, where a few parts of this area, Kansas, Oklahoma, even down into Arkansas, had a little brief flirtation with fall here the last couple days. As we see that ridge expand, we can see that new trough digging into the Pacific Northwest, and that'll spark those shower and thunderstorm activities as this kind of gets itself organized together. Initially, first, it does look like the northern Rockies potentially could get some severe weather on Thursday, and then that'll continue ejecting from the Rockies on Friday. We can see it deepens and it becomes a more negatively tilted trough as it ejects into the northern plains on Friday. It's in the southern Canadian prairies with a trailing cold front across the northern plains. That'll activate that severe weather here in the Dakotas on Friday, potentially even down into parts of Nebraska. I wouldn't be surprised if there becomes eventually like a marginal risk down here. But the main piece of energy is going to be up here closer to the Dakotas and closer to that low. That'll continue deepening as it kind of bowling balls along the 49th parallel into Saturday and Sunday. And again, by late Saturday, we can see that basically in the area about Winnipeg, maybe just a little west of Winnipeg. And then again, trailing cold front across the eastern part of the Dakotas. That'll create a lot of shower and thunderstorm activities here across Minnesota, eastern Dakotas, and down into the Missouri River Valley, and maybe pushing also into parts of Wisconsin and even the western parts of the UP late on Saturday into early Sunday, the overnight hours. And then like we saw in the other model, it does get a little stretched out here by Sunday, so a little bit more of a linear profile. But that will create, I think, some scattered storms and some more isolated to scattered severe storms from basically Nebraska, Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, across into the Great Lakes on Sunday. From there, things get a little bit squirrely, so I'm not going to really dive too deep right now into the future forecast past about this 150-hour mark. Similar to the tropical models that we discussed on the last forecast video, once we get over that 100 to 150 hour mark, things really become a little bit fantasy land. So there could be severe storms, or at least some storms, working into the eastern parts of the Great Lakes by Monday and Tuesday into next week. But we'll get, certainly as we get closer to that period, we'll get a different forecast and an updated forecast video here on WeatherCastUSA. So looking more at some of those severe weather ingredients, I want to look at the surface-based CAPE first. I think Tuesday we get a little bit more widespread severe activity compared to the last couple days in the high plains. I do think Tuesday is going to be a little bit more concentrated of a day in the Dakotas all the way down into parts of Kansas. That CAPE does move east and starts to pool up on Thursday. That'll really set the stage for Friday. And Friday, we see a really big blossoming of some really high CAPE values in that 5,000 joules per kilogram kind of range. That could set the stage again for an all-hazard severe threat. We do see some at least marginal tornado risks highlighted here. With the photographs, there is a little bit of a cap in place, but I do think that'll bust with the added instability, the high dew points, and also that the trough digging in. Especially if it is at least as strong as the models are saying now. If it's even stronger, that'll help the convective initiation even more. And we do see some pretty curved photographs here as with that wind changing with height. So I do think there's a potential here for a little bit of a concentrated tornado corridor on Friday. And then let's look here at the energy helicity index. A very similar setup here. We see a little bit of that where we had the concentrated areas severe weather on Monday, and then going into parts of Tuesday, we can see that also kind of correlates really well with the CAPE values we just saw. So again, I think there is a more concentrated severe threat here on Tuesday. And then Wednesday, we can see it push a little bit more towards the east. Wednesday, we have that severe threat across kind of the same area. And then skipping ahead to Friday, we see that energy helicity really centered here eastern part of the Dakotas, but especially here into Iowa and Minnesota, and even parts of Wisconsin. Also continuing up into the southern parts of Canada, just across the Canadian border. So potentially, again, there's going to be severe weather, I think, across the Canadian border as well. And then looking at the supercell composite, again, we see that spark, I think, on Tuesday, late Tuesday here, and then also shift to a little bit to the south and east on Wednesday, with that kind of main parameter here into the South Dakota, parts of Iowa, and southern Minnesota on Wednesday. And then by Saturday, it's a little bit messy right now, but generally we see here the supercell composite from the eastern part of the Dakotas, even stretching in this model down into Kansas, and then covering much of Minnesota, northern parts of Iowa, and also northwest Wisconsin. So again, I think anywhere in that kind of area here could get some supercellular components to this severe weather. And then that does tend to trail off here as we go into Sunday and Monday, kind of reinforcing that idea that the all hazards threat is going to be reduced after Saturday. And one more piece to the puzzle I do want to look at. This model doesn't quite go out to the weekend, but it does kind of show you the general pattern here. We can see those more humid dew points lifting back up into the Iowa, Nebraska, up into Minnesota, and especially the eastern part of the Dakotas. This is by Thursday, but that'll continue to build up across Thursday into Friday and Saturday here ahead of that trough ejecting from the Rockies. We will see a dew point recovery back up into the upper Midwest and the northern plains. That will be sufficient for severe thunderstorms by the weekend. And same here, we're going to see that heat starts to build back up, especially here by later in the week. We can see some really hot temperatures in the desert Southwest this week, even some somewhat extreme heat even for that part of the country. And then we do see that heat starting to build back into the southern and central US. And starting by this model here, starting to creep up into the Dakotas by about midweek. Instability from the higher dew points and the higher temperatures does look like it's going to rebound into the upper Midwest just in time for that trough to eject from the Rockies, creating a little bit more volatile severe weather activity, I think particularly from Friday and Saturday, potentially into Sunday. So thanks for joining us. Stay tuned to WeatherCast USA. Like, subscribe, and click that bell icon to get notifications when we go live, when we post new forecast videos. Also check out our social media, follow us, and engage with us on social media. You can see our links here, I think, scrolling above my screen. And then also stay tuned for further live streaming weather coverage, for severe weather coverage, as well as hurricane coverage, as we're nearing the more intense period of hurricane season. Things should be more active going into the late summer and fall, and we'll have you covered here on WeatherCast USA for those severe weather needs, as well as those hurricane coverage needs. So thanks for joining us. Stay safe, have multiple ways to get warnings, and we'll see you on the next one.